Welcome to Monday. Welcome to the worst day of the week. And welcome to a couple of days before the next reset of 9.2. What we have to go over for today, we went over the Mythic Plus situation, the raid situation. Yesterday we had some juicy buffs to talk about. Today, instead, we look at what changed in the past month. So we're not going to look at the popularity of specs and which became more popular, less popular, or the damage of specs and whatnot. Instead, we are looking at what changed in what they use to play the game. Particularly, the points of contention for today are going to be Covenants and also Legendaries. Why? I mean, you can use two Legendaries at the same time now, and you can now swap freely between Covenants, keeping the effect of your Covenant Legendary within your new special Unity Legendary. So we could be bound to see quite a few changes in Covenant picks for specs. This video in fact has been sponsored by my respecking to Ventir to get to Renown 80 and then to Night Fae to get to Renown 80 in the last few days, just so I have completed the full square of Covenants at Renown 80 to be able to play as a shaman. So we can go and look at how specs were before the patch. So what Covenant were they playing and what Legendary were they playing before they had these new borrowed powers coming in this patch, and then see what is the situation now, almost at the end of the first week of the double legendary, and quite a few days really since you could choose your legendary and then choose your Covenant and respec whenever you wanted to, except now also your Covenant legendary will be impacted. So for today, because this list is going to take a while and I'm not really quite concise when I talk about things, for today we are looking at tanks and healers, starting first with the tanks. So what we had before the launch of this patch. For tanks, there was a domination of Kyrian. Roughly 50% of all choices, whether it was Mythic Plus or Raid encounters, was Kyrian for all tanks. 3 of the specs, so half of the specs, were completely choosing Kyrian. You had Brewmaster Monk, Prot Warrior, and Vengeance Demon Hunter going Kyrian no matter what. You had Paladin very heavily splitting their time between the Mythic Plus pick of Kyrian and the Raid Encounter pick of Ventir. Mythic Plus because of the huge damage of Kyrian and Divine Toll, and Raid Encounters because Ashen Hallow is a very good cooldown to use in Raid Encounters. You also had the lone hipster Guardian Druid, being the only one playing Night Fae out of all tanks, and then you also had another split of Blood Death Knight, splitting between Ventir in Mythic Plus and Kyrian in Raid Encounters. Ventir because, Blood Death Knight's Swarming Mist was the best source of AoE as a Covenant ability in Mythic Plus, and also due to the generally low damage of Blood Death Knight, this would have helped them in Mythic Plus. In Raid Encounters, you don't need AoE damage as much. Kyrian gave you Shackle the Undead for more single target damage reduction for a Blood DK, so it was better overall. Now, fast forward, let's just go past 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks into this new patch. So now the specs are getting 2 legendaries, they are getting multiple Covenants to choose from, and if they have been lucky, they even have a 4-piece already, perhaps just more likely a 2-piece set bonus as well. So what we see is that we do still have decent Kyrian dominance within tanks, but not as much as before. Blood DKs are now leaning more towards Necrolord. Abomination Limb has been buffed multiple times. Now it actually does significant damage, specifically as a tank with low damage already, like Blood Death Knight. Abomination Limb helps them a lot during, let's say, big cooldowns, big packs in Mythic Plus. So it is a pretty strong cooldown for Mythic Plus. In Raid Encounters, not as much. In Raid Encounters is not as necessary, to be fair, but that is the primary swap when it comes to Covenant choices, the Blood DK swap to go to Necrolord altogether. It is still not the far and wide super popular pick. It is just the more used, but there is still quite some contention for Night Fae and even Ventir still in Mythic Plus. That being said, it might not be much, but it's still more than most of the other tanks, because the 3 tanks that were Kyrian before are still Kyrian now. Brewmaster, Monk, Prot Warrior, and Vengeance Demon Hunter are still playing Kyrian just fine, and you still have the split of Prot Paladin between Kyrian and Ventir, and you still have Guardian Druids staying Night Fae. However, if there is one change also worth pointing out, is that Guardian Druids are now trying quite a bit more Ventir, in particular in Mythic Plus. So One big cooldown, one incarnation wasn't enough. Now they want a second 3-minute cooldown, they want Sinful Hysteria as well. That's what more and more Guardian Druids are trying in Mythic Plus. Not as much in Red Encounters, it's not as needed to use that cooldown as a tank in a raid. We do have one change finally, thank God. Blood Death Knight finally gets rid of Super Strain. Super Strain has been the terrible legendary that Blood DK had to use pretty much for the entire expansion. It was a mix of the other legendaries not being as good and Super Strain giving them the damage they sorely needed and lacked in Mythic Plus especially. Now, after a series of buffs, finally they can use Crimson Rune Weapon, which is the new shiny legendary that was reworked for Blood Death Knight. Reducing Dancing Rune Weapon is also very, very good for their tier set. Now, it is also, this legendary is going to help them do even more damage in Mythic Plus thanks to their 3 hard strike hits from their set bonus. So it is now the most picked overall legendary for DK, alongside of course their most picked Covenant, meaning Covenant ability, meaning Covenant legendary as a result. In this case it's the Abomination Limbs, Abomination's Frenzy that is being picked the most. No change whatsoever for 2 of the specs that were probably the most predictable ones, Brewmaster and Prot Paladin. Prot Paladin, before the superpower of Divine Toll, they used to take Bulwark of Righteous Fury in Mythic Plus and Mad Paragon in Red Encounters for the wings uptime. Now that they have a Covenant legendary embedded into their Unity legendary, second legendary, they are still using those 2 legendaries together with their Covenant picks. In this case, Divine Toll for Kyrian, of course, and Radiant Embers for Ventier. The other obvious pick is Brewmaster. Now they are still playing, especially with this obscene, this awfully broken 4-piece set bonus. They have no reason to move away from Kegsmash anyways, so no change for Brewmaster Monk as well. Where we see some more changes, perhaps, is in Guardian Druid, of course. Guardian Druid has been staying with Earth for an eternity, particularly when it comes to Mythic Plus because of its AoE damage. It has gone down a bit, this patch. You know, instead of the 99% picks of Earth in Mythic Plus, now there is only 90%, because a few more druids are tinkering around with Legacy of the Sleeper, which is yet another super empowering of your incarnation that makes them still immortal. It still fulfills the same thing in the effect of Earth, very similar. It works particularly well, of course, because this buff activates when you get Berserk, and your set bonus gives you Berserk when you get into Barkskin. So it works there as well, that's very likely why. The other change is for Vengeance Demon Hunters who are LARPing as Havoc Demon Hunters. Because before this patch, they were mostly playing with Fiery Soul as their most used legendary. The other off-meta, a little bit more hipster choice was Razalix's Defilement. Now, that is still the option for Red Encounters. It is still the most used set of legendaries, particularly Fiery Soul. In Mythic Plus, we have a change. While Fiery Soul still has some use in Mythic Plus, we do have an overwhelming choice. Over 40% of picks are going for Dark Glare Boon. This is the legendary that gives you a chance to reset your, in this case being Vengeance, Fel Devastation. Having a 40% chance to reset Fel Devastation, you can reuse it, and thanks to your demonic talent, you can get back into Metamorphosis again. This is the main pick for Vengeance Demon Hunters for the moment. That is the other change compared to last patch for specs. Lastly, and more boringly, we have Protection Warrior. Protection Warrior was another one of those specs that had one overall clearly strongest legendary, which was Reprisal. After it was reworked, it's very powerful now, so no surprise that even into this patch, no matter what new things you got, 2-piece, 4-piece, 2 legendaries, extra power coming from multiple choices in your covenants, doesn't matter, Prot Warrior is still playing with Reprisal. So we can say that overall, out of the 12 possible options of covenants, split between 6 in Mythic Plus and 6 in Red Encounters, we do have overall just 2 changes out of 12, We could even say 3 to 4 changes out of 12 because of the higher Ventier participation of Guardian Druids. And then as legendaries go, out of the 6 specs, we do see the change to Blood Death Knight as the legendary choice across both activities, and the change to the Mythic Plus legendary of Vengeance, Demon Hunter, and the rising, although still quite on the low side, use of Legacy of the Sleeper for Guardian Druid. So we seem to be in the 10 to 20-ish% of changes for tanks between one patch and the other. Now, the other part of the video is going to be dedicated to healers. So for healers, we did have 2 varying options and then 4 quite stable and static choices. Discipline Priest being almost always Kyrian, Mistweaver Monk being almost always Ventier, Holy Paladin being almost always Ventier, and then Restoration Druid being primarily Nightfey. The only 2 varying options were Priest, Holy Priest being Kyrian for Mythic Plus and Nightfey for Raid Encounters, and then Resto Shaman being Necrolord for Raid Encounters and Kyrian for Mythic Plus. Once we get into 9.2, once you can choose your Covenant, choose your 2 legendaries, choose your, luck out and get your 2-piece and then your 4-piece set bonus. What changes for the specs? For Discipline Priest, it changes absolutely nothing. They are still just chilling in their Kyrian safe spot. For Holy Priest also, we see very little change. They are still Kyrian in Mythic Plus because Boon of the Ascended is just too much damage. We might even talk about soon the increase in power of Holy Priest in Mythic Plus because of the damage. And then in Raid Encounters, they are still simping. They are still Nightfey for the Fey Guardians and their buffs. And then Mistweaver Monk is still primarily just Ventier. However, this is where the static choices of the healers stop, with the 2 priests and the Mistweaver, because Restoration Shaman, Holy Paladin, and Restoration Druid are seeing changes. I partly lied. Restoration Shaman is seeing no changes in Mythic Plus because they are still not moving from Kyrian. That's way too much damage to pass up. Where they are changing a little bit more is in the Raid Encounters. Before it was primarily just Necrolord before this patch. Into this patch it's much more versatile and varied. There are reasons and good points you could make for Restoration Shaman to play Nightfey, for the Healing Tide cooldown reduction and the increased burst, to playing Ventier for the Chain Harvest healing, or to simply just stay Necrolord. So this is the first major change we have within healers. The other major change is in Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid was primarily Nightfey in Mythic Plus, not as much as Raid Encounters, but still primarily. Now they are starting to get overtaken by Necro. This new Necro build of Restoration Druid is getting more and more played in Mythic Plus. I'm assuming as the patch goes by, this will continue to grow. This trend of Necrolord is not just going to stop here. Very likely it's going to continue and eventually overtake Nightfey for Restoration Druid. Another change, the last of the changes, is to Holy Paladin. So technically speaking, Holy Paladin is still majorly just Ventier. They have been Ventier for a while, ever since Ashen Hallow solidified itself as a super powerful pick months and months and months ago. Now there is a more reasonable option and choice, given the amount of nerfs. Given the amount of nerfs that build received, now you see more and more Paladins trying out Kyrian, particularly in Mythic Plus, or trying out Necrolord, particularly in Raid Encounters. I think both Kyrian, but particularly Necrolord, we always said this, if the Vanquisher's Hammer build of Holy Paladin was going to work, it would have risen quite a lot in popularity. It is rising right now, not staggeringly fast. Ventier is still the main choice for Paladins, but it is on the rise at the very least, which might be refreshing for all of those Holy Paladins which have been stuck playing Ventier for the past year or more. Now, as far as legendary options, so legendary options for Druid are not changing very much. Restoration in the raid was playing with Vision of Unending Growth, and then Covenant legendaries were added to the game, so they went to play Celestial Spirits, and now they can play both of them. So very simple for the raid of Resto Druid, very similar also to Mythic Plus with Drought of Deep Focus. Now they can play it together with a Covenant legendary, so not much is changing. If we had to look at for one change for Resto Druid, given the rise of Necrolord, is that of course the Covenant legendary for Necrolord is a different one that they haven't really gotten to use too much before, which is Unbridled Swarm. So while the normal, so to speak, legendary is not going to change, the Covenant legendary for Druid being Necrolord more, particularly in Mythic Plus, is going to be a new entry, so to speak, in the options of Restoration Druid. Absolutely pointless to point out what is not changing in Holy Priest, because what a surprise, Holy Priest is still playing with Flesh Concentration. And now they are pairing it together with what they were using in Mythic Plus. Now they can just use them together, and then with encounters where they are Night Fae, they can pair it together with the Simp Night Fae Covenant Legendary. So no change really for Holy Priest either. Still no changes because we go over to Holy Paladin and they don't really change that much. In Mythic Plus, they were playing with Mad Paragon, inward encounters with Marad's Dying Breath for their Light of the Martyr build. Now, no changes when you can equip a second legendary. Even with the, possibility of going Necrolord, the other Covenant pick still stays the same, either Mad Paragon or Marad's Dying Breath. So, still no changes halfway through the healers when it comes to legendary picks. And why ruin this combo? Why ruin this list of no changes? Move over to Discipline Priest, still no changes. Now they are just pairing them together with the other legendary. In the case of Mythic Plus, is whatever other legendary you want to use. It's not quite clear, Discipline Priest can use quite a bunch of them in Mythic Plus. They can use the Penitent one for their Penance power-up, they can use the Simp legendary, the other legendary for Priest, the Twins of the Sun Priestess for the double PI. No real change for the way Discipline is going to equip their legendaries either. Now, have we gotten finally to a change with Mistweaver? No. Mistweaver was playing with Ancient Teachings of the Monastery before the Covenant legendaries were released in patch 9.0.5, I think. And then once the Covenant legendaries were added, they were playing with Sinister Teachings. Now they are playing with both of them together. So, no real change for Mistweaver. Please, God, at least one legendary change in Shamans. Fine. There is actually one change in Shamans, okay? Because while they were playing with Raging Vesper Vortex, and before that they were playing with Deep Tremor Stone in Mythic Plus, and now they are pairing them together, inward encounters we are changing. Inward encounters, they were playing with Primal Tidecore, so now they can still play with Primal Tidecore together with the Necrolord Covenant legendary. But at the moment, it's not quite the most popular choice. For example, at the moment, Resto Shaman is moving to Ventir, as we pointed out, so they are playing more with the Elemental Conduit legendary of Ventir, which isn't something they have played in a long time. The same goes for other, more niche options like the Seeds of Rampant Growth, the Covenant legendary for Night Fae. There is also the option that is rising in popularity, which is Jonat's Natural Focus, your nuclear bomb chain healing build that is rising in popularity for Resto Shaman in Red Encounters. So in the end, we looked at the diversity of tanks. We said there was a 10 to 15% change between the Covenant options and the legendary options of tanks. For healers, it is significantly worse in terms of difference of legendaries. It's basically like 5%. There's basically one change legendary at best for just the Restoration Shaman and just in Red Encounters. So very few changes in what were the strongest legendaries before this patch and after this patch for healers. When it comes to Covenant options, the only clear change is the rising of Ventir for Restoration Shaman. We can also add, if we are being nice, the rising of Necrolord for Restoration Druid and the rising of Necrolord or even Kyrian for Holy Paladin. Overall, it is still less than tanks. It's probably in the 10 to 5% range compared to the 15 to 20% range of changes that we have seen for tanks. Overall, healers are the least changed so far. It's very likely, I will in fact spoil you the upcoming videos, that they will be the least changed of all the 4 roles between tanks, healers, melee and range DPS. We receive changes between 9.1.5 and 9.2. Then again, it doesn't mean everything. You might not change your Covenant or your Legendary, but play differently, for example. Perhaps you don't care too much that you are changing your Covenant because your 4-piece set bonus or your 2-piece set bonus is making you change your talents. So you are getting your change anyways. You didn't need your change of Covenant to spice up the way your spec plays for this patch. This is what we had for this Monday. The look at the first couple of roles of this game, tanks and healers, to see what changed from the last patch to this patch. We're not quite sold on just how many changes we were expecting between one patch to the next. You know, is 20% of changes between game systems considered good or considered low? Who knows? I'm not quite sure, honestly. Where would you put your bar of necessary amount of changes to be considered a good amount? To me, tanks feels in a nice spot in terms of changes, and healers feels like a little bit on the low end of variety when it comes to options. So this was the recap for today of Covenants and Legendary choices for tanks and healers for 9.2. Thank you guys, of course, for watching the video and for helping to grow the channel. You can do more, as usual, by liking and commenting down below on the video, as well as subscribing to the channel. Of course, my delegation of lawyers have decided that this video is going to have its subscribe button unlocked, obviously, for tank and healer players. Therefore, with that being said, we can leave each other. Remembering, of course, that you can follow me on Twitter right here, just in case you want to delude yourself that you will be reading anything of mine anytime soon, as well as also you can support me on Patreon and get access to my Discord server. That being said, it's not that there is some very secret stuff being held up in my Discord. Or is there? Thank you guys for watching, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, no, but really, you know, who knows? What do you know? What's inside there? Could be something huge that I'm hiding from everyone. I guess you'll never know.